President Trump is working to roll back some of the policing policies implemented following George Floyd's murder in May 2020. The president ordered the shutdown of the National Law Enforcement Accountability Database, a first-of-its-kind resource to track reports of misconduct by federal police officers across 90 separate agencies.
It was actually Trump himself who proposed this database back in 2020, but now he seems to have soured on the idea. Last month, he revoked the Biden-era executive order that commissioned the database. That order also restricted the use of chokeholds and no-knock entries, mandated body-worn cameras, and restricted the transfer and purchase of military equipment.
Trump's repeal of the order was welcomed by law enforcement, with the National Association of Police Organizations saying they had serious concerns about the database. The NAPO said it infringed on officers' rights and access to due process, and acted as a barrier to receive additional funding. So, was the database effective in preventing police misconduct?
That point is still unclear. While then President Biden signed the executive order commissioning the database in May of 2022, it was only launched in December of 2023. Experts say the database improved public safety by preventing bad officers from jumping to agency. According to a report from the Bureau of Justice Statistics this last December, it appeared that agencies were beginning to implement it as a routine part of the hiring process. Searches of the database trended up with time, with about 3,000 searches in August of 2024 compared to fewer than 500 just 6 months prior. Well, I'm curious actually about your views, because my views here are that obviously accountability for the police is a good thing, and I think that the greater transparency we have about the police record is a good thing. I think that any private company has HR records of its employees, and obviously those are not necessarily leading to, well, we hope they're not leading to criminal charges for anybody, but they are there to have a record of whether perhaps there are problematic elements in someone's record and all of that. I don't see a big difference between that and this kind of database. The reason I'm curious about your view is that you're, conservative but libertarian-minded, and as we mentioned in a previous segment, we have talked before about incarceration and things like that, where we find a surprising amount of common ground. So what's your view on all this?
Yeah, I will admit to being a little bit torn on this. On the one hand, I don't love the idea, the optics of removing an accountability database of police officers. Just looks really bad. It feels really bad. Why would we want to not have a database that tracks officers' individual infractions or reports by citizens? Because there is the problem of the wandering police officer, and this comes from a Yale study that was done a couple of years ago, around the time of George Floyd and the likes, that showed that there was this 3% of police officers who drifted from department to department, or left Miami and goes to Tampa, as an example, to be a cop there after they ran into problems in city number 1. So that looks bad. But on the other hand, and this sort of ties in with our IRS discussion, this was just implemented in 2023. The house is not going to burn down. This is not something like it has decades and decades of precedent and we're going to be losing something with a historical legacy. This is open and shut of the book quite quickly before it even has an opportunity to make a big impact.
Well, I mean, that may be so, but if we think, and it seems like we do share the opinion that the underlying principle is a good thing, getting rid of something that is a good thing is still a bad thing, even if the good thing has only been in existence for a short period of time. Yeah, I mean, to sort of say, oh, well, it's only been around for a couple of years, so we can just get rid of it. I mean, that just doesn't seem to be, with all due respect, a particularly solid position to come to, because if we want these officers, their records to be known, and we want to be able to trace exactly the problem that you identify from that Yale study, obviously it would be better to have this than to wipe it out, no?
You could say that. I do think that, again, the optics of this are bad, but we also have another problem, and it's a huge political problem for Donald Trump, who, again, he signaled that he was open to this database at the end of his term in 2020 as the riots were kind of tearing across America and the Black Lives Matter movement was at full steam. He was the one who proposed this, but times have changed. The American voters have backlashed against this in a big way. Police departments are gutted in major cities, LA, New York, San Francisco, resignations and early retirements are incredibly high. And this is not always true. Voters' perception of being unsafe and crime is not always accurate. But if voters are saying so loudly that they feel unsafe in their cities, you got to do something to make people want to be police officers again. And this is a signal to anyone who wants to be a cop, like, we're not trying to put you into some big blacklist database to track every single complaint against you that might be justified or unjustified.
I think you're getting into very shaky ground there. When you take the view that we have to make it more appealing to be police officers by removing a record of misconduct by police officers, I think you get into a very shady and shaky moral position, because you're really saying
record.
Right, but
it's not like you don't have a record if you commit misconduct.
Right, but the point of having the federal record is to address the very point that you yourself identified, which was people moving. They're not all going to be moving from Miami to Tampa. Sometimes they're going to be moving from Miami to Minneapolis, and therefore that's why there is the need for that kind of federal record.
A police officer breezes into town and is looking for a job, and turns out he was run out of Miami for acting poorly. This is a real issue, and the thing that I was part of advocating for after the George Floyd incident was the end of qualified immunity. And this is just police officers being able to get off scot-free and given immunity for infractions when they're performing the job. That, combined with body cams, I thought was the road to police reform. But the thing about George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement flaming out is that immediately went off the rails into just being incredibly unconstructive. Qualified immunity did not happen, and we just sort of had this heavy slap on the wrist for police officers with things like this, that the police officers union say violates their privacy, gives them no due process, and communicates from the Biden administration then to the police officers, we're suspicious of you. We don't think that you're heroes. We don't think that you're serving your community. We think poorly of you, and nobody wants to sign up for that.
I do think that there are a lot of dangers in going down the path of suggesting that because there is a public backlash against some extremists or some extreme actions, that we then loosen the safeguards against bad policing. George Floyd was murdered in the most brutal fashion, and thankfully the person who murdered him was convicted of that crime. It was captured on video, which is one of the reasons why it had the power that it has. There is obviously still a problem with policing. It is right that people who are problematic or overly punitive police officers get scrutinised for that, and where appropriate get sanctioned for that. And I think that this is helping that, and I think that it is part of Trump's overreach to say that we'll just clear that up and let it go.
You know, one of my thoughts on this, just sort of to cap this off, is that this was an executive action from Biden to implement this accountability database. And it was appealing to the ACLU and to Black Lives Matter. It was not appealing to the police union, and there were several civil rights organizations and a lot of libertarian criminal justice organizations who were also going, this order and this accountability database has a lot of holes in it. It either doesn't go too far enough in its mandates of information sharing between police departments, and by the way, it also violates due process. So there were both parties from the left and right going, this could have been better, which is why things like this should go through Congress. There should actually be legislation that lays out the law and gives both interest groups an opportunity to come and lobby in Washington, D.C. and make a better bill and a better law.
Yes, but let me just, we have to finish this off here, but let me just emphasize, it isn't always just a battle between interest groups. There are actually bigger principles of fairness and accountability at stake. And so whether it pleases the ACLU or the police union, fine. That is tangential to the real point of having a police system that people can have faith will certainly do policing, but do it in an equitable way to all the people of this country.
I'll let you have it.
On that topic, the administration has put out a most interesting video on deportations. There's a little teaser for you. It's coming up next. Stay with us.